The next chapter is called The Man I Killed. And I just want to point out that there are so many examples in this chapter of literary devices, figurative language, really the art and craft of creative writing, which is what helps us as readers have a deeper feeling like within ourselves, that we empathize with the character here. So this first part is describing the man I killed. This is Tim O'Brien narrating, and there's just terribly graphic detail here about the way he looks. And I want to point out also, besides obviously imagery, because we can definitely see what this young man looks like as a dead soldier based on all of these very gruesome and graphic details. But I also want you to notice the syntax. So syntax is sentence structure. And this chapter opens with a run-on sentence. His jaw was in his throat. That's an independent clause. His upper lip and teeth were gone. That's also an independent clause. His one eye was shut. Instead of having periods at the end of these sentences, we have commas. So this creates a very long run-on. And the emotional effect of that is that we feel sort of that collective intake of detail that the narrator is experiencing, that these are all the things that are racing through his mind as he looks at this dead man. And when you write something like this with a run-on sentence that goes on and on and on for, how many lines? 10, 12 lines. We get that feeling of a racing mind, all the things that are just sort of like assaulting us visually when you see something like this. And then after this long sentence, we have short sentences, 1 and 2 lines. He lay face up in the center of the trail, a slim, dead, almost dainty young man. So that is a beautiful, simple sentence. He had bony legs, a narrow waist, long, shapely fingers. His chest was sunken and poorly muscled, a scholar maybe. So juxtaposed against the gruesome details of his injury, we have his description of him more as a human, as a living person, what his features are. It talks about what he's wearing, his pajama pants. It goes on and on. It says here, he was not a communist. He was a citizen and a soldier. So this means he's not the original enemy. He's obviously a soldier, so he's fighting something, but he's not the original communist that came from North Korea. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. That came from North Vietnam. He's probably with the Vietcong, which would have been, groups of guerrilla warfare, people who joined the communists to fight for this new government within Vietnam. It says that they're at the village of Mai Kay, and just historically, Mai Kay is a place where there were some brutal battles, and it's definitely one of the places that I think helped to instigate the anti-war movement. Just a lot of the things that were happening there were very atrocious. It goes on to talk about from his earliest boyhood, the man I killed would have listened to stories about the heroic Trung sisters in the Trang Hung Dao's famous rout of the Mongols and the Leloi's final victory against the Chinese at Tat Dong. He would have been taught that to defend the land was a man's highest duty and highest privilege. He had accepted this. It was never open to question. Secretly, though, it also frightened him. He was not a fighter. So this description is humanizing this young man, showing what his history is personally as a Vietnamese boy growing up. Also that, this kind of goes along with his description over here as being delicate, young, innocent, that he was not a fighter, that he was afraid, which obviously Tim O'Brien also was afraid. The response to the fact that Tim O'Brien killed this young soldier, the other guys in his group are like, this awesome, great job, you did the right thing. And they say pretty inhumane things. Azar in particular says some pretty mean things about the way he was killed. And Kiowa comes to Tim O'Brien's defense and he says, go away, go. Like, don't say gruesome things about this right now, because clearly Tim is upset. Which is ironic here is that earlier in the book, Kiowa did this when he talked about the death of Ted Lavender, that, he joked about how he was in the tree and how he died, and, that he was zapped while zipping and all that kind of stuff. And that was crude. And now he's criticizing Azar for doing the same thing. And then he turns to Tim and he says, just forget that crud. What else could you do? You did the right thing. And then he says, come on, anybody would have done what you did. Quit staring. And so clearly Tim O'Brien is in shock, staring at the body of the dead soldier. All right, Kiowa says, let me ask you a question. Do you want to trade places with him? Turn it around. Like, do you want that? Would you want to be dead? Because that's potentially what could have happened. And then he emphasizes to Tim that it's a war. The guy wasn't hiding. He had a weapon. It's a tough thing for sure, but you got to cut out that staring. So this implies to me that Tim O'Brien is in shock, that he just can't handle the reality of what he's done. And Kiowa is trying to help him through it. He changes his tactic. He's clearly not able to get Tim to stop staring. And he says, take it slow. Just go wherever the spirit takes you. He's trying to just help him process this. So we have repetition here because, again, there's the description of the right cheek, the way the eyes look, just the description of his brutally injured body. Even as a boy growing up in the village of Maikay, he had often worried about this. He imagined covering his head and lying in a deep hole and closing his eyes and not moving until the war was over. He had no stomach for violence. He loved mathematics. So what this is Tim O'Brien imagining the life that the soldier could have had. Also thinking about who the soldier was. He imagines, based on how he looks, that he liked mathematics, that he imagined that there would possibly be a war, and he had been afraid. It goes on to talk about how delicate he is, how on the playground kids would mimic a woman's walk and make fun of his smooth skin and his love for mathematics. The young man could not make himself fight them. He often wanted to, but he was afraid, and this increased his shame. If he could not fight little boys, he thought, how could he ever become a soldier and fight the Americans with their airplanes and helicopters and bombs? So this shows he is the enemy, and he is fighting against the side the Americans are on. But he's not himself a communist, at least not at this point in time. Maybe he would have become one later. So he's fighting. What we get from all of this is that the young soldier was likely fighting out of duty, and that we don't know, this is not a fact. We don't know that the soldier was bullied. We don't know that he loved mathematics, but this is what Tim is imagining him to be. And so this is just another example of humanizing the enemy, humanizing war. I mean, this is real death. These are real people. Listen to me, Kiowa said. You feel terrible, I know that. And then he says, well, maybe I don't know, because maybe he hasn't killed anybody. Along the trail, there were small blue flowers shaped like bells. The young man's head was wrenched sideways, not quite facing the flowers. So we go back to the description of how he's laying there along the trail. Kiowa goes back to stop staring. And then we get another long description of the soldier, like what his life might have been. Like maybe he had gone to university. Maybe he was going to, really become a mathematician. Maybe he met a woman and he was going to get married. These are all things that could have been. We don't know for sure. And then Kiowa interrupts Tim O'Brien's thoughts and says, are you okay? The corpse is lying in the shade. There were gnats in the mouth, etc. Kiowa picked up the rubber sandals, clapping off the dirt, and then bent down to search the body. He found a pouch of rice, a comb, a fingernail clipper, a few soiled plasters, which is Band-Aids, a snapshot of a young woman standing in front of a parked motorcycle. So that was a girlfriend, perhaps. Then he squatted down. I'll tell you the straight truth, he said. The guy was dead the second he stepped on that trail. Understand me? We all had him zeroed. A good kill. Weapon, ammunition, everything. So listen, you best pull your shit together. We can't just sit here all day. 5 minutes and we're moving out. So he's getting tough with Tim. He's like, we gotta We got to get going. This is a war, remember? And again, Tim O'Brien goes back to imagining what the soldier's life would have been like. Like, after his years at the university, the man I killed returned with his new wife to the village of Maikay, where he enlisted as a common rifleman with the 48th Vietcong Battalion. He knew he would die quickly. He knew he would see a flash of light. He knew he would fall dead and wake up in the stories of his village and his people. So maybe this was inevitable, that a lot of young men were joining the Viet Cong, and that would have been sort of like the expected outcome. So this is just an internal dialogue that Tim O'Brien is having the entire time about trying to reconcile what happened, what it means to actually fight in a war, what it means to kill somebody. This next chapter, Ambush, is a companion chapter to this. When she was 9, my daughter Kathleen asked if I ever killed anyone. She says, "You keep writing about these war stories, so I guess you must have killed someone." And what he says is, of course not, because he doesn't want to tell his daughter he killed somebody. But he would love to be able to tell her sometime. I want to tell her exactly what happened or what I remembered happening. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was right. This is why I keep writing war stories. And then we get a description of what happened. One version of it. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him, afraid of something, and as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that exploded at his feet and killed him. Or, to go back, so here's more of the story. After midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside Maikay. The whole platoon was there, spread out. We were working in 2-man teams. One was on guard while the other slept, switching off every 2 hours. It was dark. Kiowa shook him awake, and then it's Kiowa's turn to sleep. So Kiowa and Tim are on the same 2-man team. And for a half hour, he kneels there and waits. He's just doing his job. He's on lookout. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the fog, and from my position in the bush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. And then looking up there, he sees a young man coming out of the fog. He wore black clothing, rubber sandals, and a gray ammunition belt. It describes what he was wearing. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or military duty. I crouched and kept my head low. I tried to swallow whatever was rising from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade. I was terrified. There were no thoughts about killing. The grenade was to make him to go away, just evaporate. I leaned back and felt my head go empty and then felt it fill up again. I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. So this is important. This shows how automatic it is to fight. They're in a war. They're on a war front. They've been trained what to do. He's doing what he's supposed to do in this situation, even though his intellect and his emotions are battling this reality. He does it. It's also why he feels like he's going to throw up. Like, he's just so traumatized by this reality. And then it describes how he throws it just randomly, and, how he feels about it. Like, I wanted to warn him. He was about to die. And then he describes the grenade made a popping noise, not soft but loud, sort of like this in-between noise. And then there's a puff of smoke, and then the young soldier just is blown up completely. For me, it was not a matter of live or die. I was in no real peril. Almost certainly the young man would have passed me by, and it will always be that way. I was a soldier, and this was war, is what Kiowa told him. So there are contradictions here, and I just made a note. I think this chapter, the previous one, and honestly the next one, has a lot of contradictions where it's like, it's terrible, but it's expected, and you feel horrible about it, but you do it anyway. And so there's definitely a lot of internal conflict over this moment. All I could do was gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself, other times I don't. So that's a contradiction. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it, but now and then, when I'm reading a newspaper or just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and see the young man step out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side. And he just imagines that again. So this is also showing us that these things that happen in war, they become part of your life forever after you are done serving. I also think it's important just to recognize the details in these two chapters, because it's a great example of showing, not telling. When you write a story about yourself or just a fictional story, it's way more impactful and it's much better for the reader if you can give very specific details instead of just saying, I had conflicting feelings about what happened, or I imagined his life when he was alive and now he's dead. Those kinds of things don't make us feel anything. But the details of what this young man looked like and the way these memories haunt Tim later in life make us feel just how serious it is to serve in war. This last short little chapter is about something different, but I'm keeping it together because, again, we have a lot of juxtaposition here, and it's a nice short chapter before a long one. So this is a story about when the platoon blew up an entire village. Most of the hamlet had been burned down, including her house, and there's a 14-year-old girl who's dancing. And she's the only person, it seems, who's left alive in this town that they have just completely blown up, torched, bombed, whatever. It describes all the ways that she's dancing, and Azar is like, why is she dancing? This makes no sense. Her whole village has been destroyed. Later on, we found her family in the house. They were dead and badly burned. It wasn't a big family, an infant and an old woman. That's pretty much it. We dragged them out. The girl kept dancing. So this is a sharp contrast to what's happening all around her. She put the palms of her hands against her ears, which must have meant something like, I don't want to know. That's what makes me think of, I don't want to know what's happening. And she danced sideways for a short while and then backwards, maybe away from the grotesqueness of the death of her family. She was dancing gracefully. I don't get it, Azar said. The smoke from the hooches smelled like straw. It moved in patches across the village square, not thick anymore, sometimes just faint ripples like fog. There were dead pigs. It was terrible. Hooches, so just to remind you, they talk about this in terms of the military barracks too. They can be used, this term is meant to mean like an impromptu sort of temporary shelter. It can be a tent, it can be a shack, it can be sort of mud huts, it can be anything. And so these villages are described this way as well. The girl gets up on her toes and she's dancing through the smoke. Her face has a dreamy looking quality to it. And Azar says it's probably some weird ritual. But Henry Dobbins looked back and said, no, the girl just liked to dance. And remember, Henry Dobbins is the more sensitive one. He likes there to be a moral to the story. That night after we marched away from the smoking village, Azar mocked the girls dancing. But Henry Dobbins, who moved gracefully for such a big man, took Azar from behind and lifted him up high and carried him over to a deep well and asked if he wanted to be dumped in. So he got mad at him for making fun of that little girl. Azar said no, and then Henry Dobbins said, okay, then dance right. Don't make fun of her. So juxtaposition, putting two ideas that are very opposite next to each other, or two descriptions that are very opposite next to each other, like we have here, a torched village and then a young girl dancing, sends a message that's deeper, and it sort of helps to reinforce the theme, which is that war is illogical, war is ambiguous, war is contradicting. War carries a tremendous amount of inner and social conflict.